My name is Harper, and I'm 28 years old. The clock read 2 a.m. when the pain hit me like a freight train tearing through my abdomen. I drove myself to the emergency room, hands shaking on the wheel, wondering if I was dying. The doctor's face was grave when he told me my appendix had ruptured and I needed emergency surgery immediately. I tried calling everyone. Mom, Dad, my older brother Garrett, my younger sister Brooke. Every single call went straight to voicemail. The nurse asked if anyone was coming, and I realized with cold clarity that I was completely alone. Before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button because this story is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the truth finally comes out, because what my family did next will shock you. I woke up from surgery feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, groggy and nauseous, with a burning pain across my lower abdomen. The recovery room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses moving between patients. Patrice, the nurse assigned to me, had kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She adjusted my IV and told me the surgery had gone well, but it had been close. Another hour of delay, and the infection could have spread to dangerous levels. I nodded, trying to process this information while my head felt stuffed with cotton. Then I reached for my phone on the side table, my fingers clumsy and slow. The screen lit up with the time, 8:15 a.m., but there were 0 notifications. No missed calls, no text messages, no voicemails. Nothing from my family. My family consisted of 5 people, including me, but it always felt like the math didn't quite add up that way. There was my younger sister Brooke, 25 years old, and the undisputed star of our family. She'd been cheerleading captain in high school, homecoming queen, sorority president in college, and now worked as a marketing manager at some trendy startup. Everything Brooke touched turned to gold, or at least that's what our parents always said. Then there was Garrett, my older brother at 32, the pride and joy of the family. Yale graduate, investment banker, pulling in a 6-figure salary before he turned 25. Our parents brought him up in every conversation like he was some kind of trophy they'd won. My mother, Diane, 54, worked as a real estate agent and loved telling people about her successful children. My father, Russell, 57, was a corporate attorney who measured worth in achievement and status. And then there was me, just Harper. I had decent grades growing up, nothing spectacular. I pursued quiet hobbies like drawing and reading. I became a graphic designer, which was stable but not glamorous. I was the middle child who learned early on that I existed somewhere in the space between Garrett's accomplishments and Brooke's sparkle. I became background noise in my own family's story. The memories flooded back as I lay in that hospital bed, each one a small cut that had never quite healed. My college graduation came to mind first. It earned my degree in graphic design, worked hard for 4 years, and was excited to have my family there to celebrate. They came to the ceremony, sat in the audience, took a few photos afterward. Then my mother checked her phone and announced they needed to leave early because Brooke had a sorority mixer that evening that was apparently very important for networking. They were gone within 20 minutes of the ceremony ending, leaving me standing in my cap and gown in a parking lot, watching their car disappear. When I moved into my first apartment, Id asked if anyone could help me move some furniture. Garrett said he was too busy, which I understood because he had a demanding job. But then I found out through social media that the entire family had spent that same weekend helping Garrett move into his new penthouse across town. They'd all been together, laughing and bonding, while Id hired movers I couldn't really afford and assembled furniture alone until midnight. A year ago, Id finally worked up the courage to display my artwork in a small local gallery show. It wasn't a huge event, just a coffee shop gallery featuring emerging artists, but it meant everything to me. Id invited my family weeks in advance, sent reminder texts, even offered to save them seats. None of them came. When I asked my mother about it later, she said Brooke had a date that night and needed help picking out an outfit, so the whole family had gotten involved in this apparently critical fashion emergency. My art show wasn't mentioned again. Id learned over the years to need them less, to expect less, to ask for less. But somewhere deep down, I still craved their love and approval like a plant desperate for sunlight. I still hoped that maybe one day they'd see me the way they saw Garrett and Brooke. Lying in that hospital bed, I decided to try calling again. Maybe their phones had been off. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation. I dialed my mother's number with shaking fingers, and this time she answered on the third ring. Her voice sounded rushed and distracted, with noise in the background that I couldn't quite place. I said, trying to keep my voice steady, that I'd just had emergency surgery and my appendix had ruptured. There was a pause, and then my mother said, "Oh, honey, that was terrible." But they were at the airport. Brooke had planned this surprise family vacation to Turks and Caicos, and Shed worked so hard on it, put so much effort into organizing everything. They'd call me when they landed. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, even though I was already lying down. I asked if she was serious, if they were really leaving right now. My mother's voice took on that tone she used when she was trying to be patient with me, the one that made me feel like a difficult child. She said sweetly that Brooke had booked this trip months ago, and they couldn't just cancel it. The flights were non-refundable, the resort was paid for, and besides, I was fine now, right? The surgery was over. They'd bring me back a souvenir. Before I could respond, before I could tell her that I was terrified and in pain and needed someone, she said she had to go because they were boarding soon. The call ended and I stared at the phone in my hand like it was some foreign object I didn't recognize. I lay there looking at the ceiling tiles, counting them because it was something to focus on besides the crushing weight in my chest. This feeling wasn't new. This feeling of being forgotten, of being secondary, of not quite mattering enough. But somehow this magnified it, crystallized it into something I couldn't ignore or rationalize away. It almost died, and they'd gotten on a plane to go have fun in the sun. Nurse Patrice came back to check my vitals and must have seen something on my face because she asked gently if I was all right. That simple question, that small moment of someone actually seeing me, broke something open. I started crying, not the quiet tears I was used to, but huge, gasping sobs that made my incision hurt. Patrice didn't ask questions, just pulled up a chair and sat with me, her hand warm on my shoulder, while I cried out years of being invisible. The next morning brought a different kind of pain, the sharp physical reminder that my body had been cut open and stitched back together. Every movement sent lightning bolts of hurt across my abdomen. Getting out of bed to use the bathroom was an ordeal that took 15 minutes and left me sweating. I'd barely managed to shuffle back to bed when Dr. Nolan Reed came in for morning rounds. He was 42, with silver threading through his dark hair and the calm, competent manner of someone who'd done this thousands of times. He checked my chart, examined my incision, asked about my pain levels. Then he looked around the room, taking in the absence of flowers, the empty visitor chair, the single cup of water on the bedside table. He asked about my family support system for recovery. I lied and told him they were coming later. I couldn't bear to say the truth out loud to this professional stranger who probably had a loving family waiting for him at home. "Doctor," Reed sat down on the rolling stool and explained in detail what the next few days would look like. I needed someone at home with me for at least 72 hours. No driving because the anesthesia and pain medication would affect my reflexes and judgment. No lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds because the strain could tear my stitches. No stairs if possible, or if stairs were unavoidable, take them slowly and hold the railing. He emphasized that appendix removal was major surgery even though people often minimized it, and my case had been complicated by the rupture. I needed to take this seriously. I nodded along, agreeing to everything. While inside I was calculating how I'd manage all of this completely alone in my third-floor walk-up apartment. The discharge paperwork arrived later that afternoon, and there was a section for emergency contacts. The page was mostly blank except for Ivy's name and number. Ivy was my coworker, 29 years old, and honestly my only real friend. We'd bonded over shared frustrations at work and discovered we had similar senses of humor. She was the kind of person who remembered little things you mentioned in passing and followed up about them later. I hesitated before texting her because I hated asking for help, hated admitting I needed anything from anyone. But I was out of options. I typed out a message explaining that Id had emergency surgery the night before, my family was on vacation, and could she maybe possibly help me get home from the hospital. I stared at the text for 5 minutes before finally hitting send. Ivy's response came through in less than 30 seconds. She wrote in all capital letters, asking what had happened and saying she was coming right now. True to her word, she walked through my hospital room door within an hour, still wearing her work badge, and slightly out of breath like shed run from the parking lot. The first thing she said was asking if I was okay, and the second thing was expressing disbelief that my family had left during my surgery. I found myself defending them weakly, saying that Brooke had planned the trip months ago and they couldn't get refunds. Ivy stopped unpacking the bag Shed brought and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She said very clearly that I could have died, that this was insane, that no vacation was more important than being there when your family member was in the hospital having emergency surgery. Something about hearing someone else validate what I'd been feeling made my throat tight. Ivy helped me get dressed, which was humiliating because I could barely bend over to put on socks. She packed up the few belongings I'd brought to the hospital, asked the nurse for extra care instructions, and got a wheelchair to take me down to her car. The ride to my apartment was quiet. I dozed off a few times from the pain medication, jerking awake when we hit bumps. My apartment felt strange when we walked in, like it'd been gone for months instead of just over 24 hours. Everything was exactly as I'd left it in my panic the night before. A mug of tea sat on the coffee table, half drunk and probably growing mold by now. My laptop was still open on the couch. The normalcy of it all felt jarring against how much had changed. Ivy took charge immediately. She got me settled on the couch with pillows propped behind me and a blanket over my legs. She filled my prescriptions at the pharmacy downstairs, came back and organized all the medications with a written schedule. She made soup, simple chicken noodle from a can, but it was warm, and I realized I hadn't eaten in over a day. She fluffed pillows, adjusted the TV remote within easy reach, filled a water bottle, and generally moved around my space like a small tornado of efficiency and care. I kept thanking her, over and over, until she told me gently to stop. She said she was staying for a few days and had already cleared it with work. I tried to protest, but she shut that down quickly, saying that someone needed to be here and she was happy it could be her. Over the next 3 days, Ivy became a witness to something I'd never really let anyone see before. She watched me check my phone obsessively, hoping for a message from my family. She saw my face fall each time there was nothing. She was there when I finally got added to the family group chat, which had apparently been active the entire time. The messages rolled in with vacation photos. Brooke in a bright bikini on a pristine beach, caption reading paradise with my favorite people. Garrett snorkeling with tropical fish, writing about living his best life. My parents at a fancy resort restaurant post captioned, so blessed with our family. I wasn't tagged in any of the photos. I wasn't mentioned in any of the captions. It was like I didn't exist. Ivy saw these messages because I'd left my phone on the coffee table when I went to the bathroom, and it lit up with a notification. When I came back, moving slowly and holding my side, she was staring at the screen with an expression of pure fury. She asked me why I let them treat me this way. I didn't have a good answer. I said something about how they didn't mean to, how I just wasn't as important as Garrett and Brooke, how it had always been this way. Ivy set the phone down carefully and said something that would stick with me. She said that what I was describing was abuse, that emotional neglect was a real thing, that families could be toxic and harmful even without physical violence. I'd never thought about it in those terms before. I'd always just accepted that this was how things were, that maybe I was too sensitive or expecting too much. Day 4 of recovery arrived and Ivy had to go back to work. She made me promise to call if I needed anything, left detailed notes about medication schedules, and stocked my fridge with easy meals. After she left, the apartment felt too quiet. The pain was manageable now with medication, but the loneliness was harder to medicate away. I found myself scrolling through social media, something I normally didn't do much, but I was bored and hurting and feeling sorry for myself. That's when I saw it. Another post from my family's vacation. This one was clearly professional, taken by a resort photographer. Everyone was dressed in coordinated white linen outfits, posed on the beach at sunset, looking like something out of a travel magazine. The caption read, "Family is everything, so grateful for these moments." I stared at that photo for a long time. Family is everything. But I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't part of their everything. Something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the pain medication lowering my inhibitions. Maybe it was 4 days of silent treatment. Maybe it was 28 years of being invisible, finally catching up with me. Whatever it was, I acted on impulse in a way I normally never did. I opened a browser, created a throwaway account on a popular forum, changed some identifying details to protect anonymity. Then I started typing. I titled the post asking if I was wrong to be hurt, that my family skipped my emergency surgery for a vacation. Then I told the whole story. The midnight pain, driving myself to the hospital, the ruptured appendix, calling everyone and getting no answer, the surgery alone, waking up alone, my mother's phone call from the airport, the vacation photos, while I recovered in my apartment by myself. I kept it factual and straightforward. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I didn't call them names or make accusations. I just laid out what had happened and asked if my hurt feelings were valid or if I was being unreasonable like they seemed to think. I read it over once, my finger hovering over the post button. Part of me knew this was a bad idea, that I was opening a door I might not be able to close. But another part of me, the part that had been silenced for so long, needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. I hit post and then closed the app. I took my afternoon pain medication and fell asleep on the couch, not expecting anything to come of it. I woke up 3 hours later to my phone buzzing so constantly it was vibrating off the coffee table. I grabbed it, confused and still groggy from sleep. The notifications were out of control. The post had exploded, 50,000 shares, hundreds of thousands of comments. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the responses. People were outraged on my behalf. Comments flooded in saying this was horrific, expressing sympathy, calling my family toxic and abusive. Someone wrote that they'd been a nurse for 30 years and had never seen a patient completely alone during emergency surgery when family was physically capable of being there. Another person said they'd cut off their own family for less. There were offers to send flowers, requests for my address so people could help, strangers saying they'd be my family. I started crying, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support from thousands of people I'd never met. The post got picked up by Reddit and spread to multiple subreddits. It jumped to Twitter where it became a trending topic. Facebook groups dedicated to family dysfunction and trauma recovery shared it widely. Major online communities were discussing my story, dissecting the dynamics, sharing their own experiences of being scapegoated or neglected by family. Mental health professionals and trauma therapists were commenting with analysis of narcissistic family systems. News outlets and online magazines were sending direct messages asking for interviews. My anonymous post had somehow become a cultural moment. Ivy called me, her voice urgent, asking if I'd posted something online because her entire social media feed was talking about a woman whose family left her during surgery. I admitted it was me, my voice small. I expected her to be mad, but instead she said good, that they should be exposed, that maybe this would make them realize how badly they'd hurt me. I told her I was scared they'd figure out it was about them. Ivy pointed out that maybe they needed to know how I felt since I'd apparently never been able to tell them directly. We stayed on the phone for an hour while I read her some of the comments and tried to process what was happening. The strangest part was what happened next. Strangers started sending care packages to my workplace, the only semi-public information available about me through my social media. Flowers arrived by the dozen, cards with handwritten notes of support, gift baskets full of comfort items, meal delivery gift certificates. All of it addressed to the girl whose family forgot her or variations on that theme. My boss called me, confused but kind, saying the office looked like a flower shop and did I want them to drop everything off at my apartment. I was touched but also terrified. The post was anonymous, but the response was very public, and it was only a matter of time before my family connected the dots. That time came sooner than I expected. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. A woman's voice introduced herself as my Aunt Lorraine, my father's older sister. I barely knew her. She'd been cut off from the family years ago for reasons that were never fully explained to me. Lorraine said she'd seen the post circulating and immediately knew it was about her brother's family. She said she recognized the patterns because she'd lived through them herself. Lorraine had been ostracized from the family 15 years earlier after she called out my father's favoritism toward Garrett at a family dinner. She'd tried to advocate for me, apparently, when I was a teenager, and the family had responded by cutting her off completely. She offered her support now, said I wasn't alone anymore, gave me her phone number and told me to call anytime. Having this unexpected ally, this family member who actually saw what was happening, felt like finding water in a desert. A week had passed since my surgery when my family finally returned from their tropical paradise. I was moving around better by then, able to walk without hunching over in pain, though I still got tired easily and the incision site was tender. My phone lit up with a text from my mother, asking how I was feeling and saying they'd love to stop by tomorrow with souvenirs. The casual tone, like she was just checking in after a normal week apart, made my stomach turn. I typed back a single word, sure, because I didn't trust myself to write anything more without the anger bleeding through. That evening, my phone rang. Garrett's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. His voice when I picked up was ice cold, sharper than I'd ever heard him speak to me. He asked if I'd posted about the family online. My blood went cold and I managed to stammer out a confused what. Garrett said there was some viral post about a family skipping surgery, and Brooke's friends had sent it to her, recognizing enough details to know it was about us. He asked again, his voice tight with controlled rage, if I had written it. I stayed silent, which was apparently answer enough. Garrett launched into me. He asked if I had any idea what I'd done, told me that Brooke was being harassed online, that people were calling our parents terrible, that his colleagues at work were asking him about it. I found my voice enough to say that I hadn't used anyone's names. He shot back that I didn't have to, that everyone they knew had figured it out, and now I needed to take it down immediately. I told him I couldn't take it down, that it was anonymous and posted from an account I no longer had access to, which was partly true. Then I added, with more strength than I felt, that I wouldn't take it down even if I could. Garrett's voice went dangerously quiet and asked me to repeat that. I said they'd left me alone during emergency surgery, and it almost died while they were taking photos on a beach. He called me dramatic, said I was clearly fine, pointed out that the trip had been planned for months and they couldn't get refunds. I felt something shift inside me, some boundary I'd never enforced before suddenly becoming clear. I said that I'd needed them. Garrett's response was harsh. He said I was 28 years old and didn't need mommy and daddy anymore, that I needed to grow up. Then he hung up on me. I sat there shaking, partly from anger and partly from the fear of breaking family rules. I'd followed my whole life. The rule that said, don't make waves, don't complain, don't need too much. Accept your place in the hierarchy. The next day, I was still in my pajamas when there was loud knocking at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and definitely wasn't prepared for what happened when I opened it. My entire family stood in the hallway. Mom, Dad, Garrett, and Brooke, all looking varying degrees of angry. They pushed past me into my small apartment without waiting for an invitation. I was still recovering, still had bandages under my shirt, still got winded climbing the 3 flights of stairs to my place. But none of them seemed to notice or care about my physical state. Brooke started crying immediately, her face red and blotchy. She asked how I could do this to her, told me her Instagram was flooded with people calling her a spoiled brat, said she was being bullied online because of my drama. My mother chimed in, voice tight, saying they needed me to post a retraction immediately, to say I'd exaggerated or misunderstood the situation. My father, the attorney, spoke in his courtroom voice about how this was damaging their reputations, how his law firm partners had seen the post, how this could affect his career. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, if anyone was here to check on how I was doing. The question seemed to confuse them. Brooke stopped crying long enough to say that I was clearly fine since I was standing there. But I wasn't fine. I was 1 week post-op from major surgery, still on pain medication, still barely able to stand for more than 20 minutes at a time. My mother said Shed told me they would call when they landed, making it sound like I was being unreasonable for expecting more. Brooke's voice got louder as she said I was fine. I was standing right there, but she was being bullied online because of my drama. The word drama, applied to my emergency surgery and near-death experience, made something snap inside me. I raised my voice, something I never did, and said that they'd left me to die. The room went silent. My family stared at me like Eid started speaking another language. I kept going, the words pouring out after being held back for so long. I told them Id called everyone, that no one answered, that Id signed surgery papers alone, woken up alone, gone home alone, and they'd been taking selfies on a beach the entire time. Garrett called me hysterical. That word, used to dismiss women's legitimate emotions since the beginning of time. I told them all to get out. My mother tried to reason with me, saying I was being ridiculous. I walked to my door, opened it, and told them again to leave. I said if they didn't leave immediately, I would call the police. My father's face turned red, a vein pulsing in his temple the way it did when he was truly angry. But they started moving toward the door. Brooke stopped in the doorway for a parting shot, her voice venomous in a way I'd never heard before. She said that I was dead to her. Then they were gone, their footsteps echoing down the stairwell, leaving me standing in my doorway shaking from head to toe. The hours after that confrontation were quiet. Too quiet, like the calm before a hurricane. I tried to rest, tried to process what had just happened, tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing by standing up for myself. Then my phone started going crazy again, but this time it wasn't supportive strangers. My family had launched a counteroffensive. Brooke posted on her Instagram, which had a following of around 20,000 people built up through lifestyle content and influencer partnerships. Her post was carefully crafted, never mentioning me by name but making it abundantly clear who she meant. She wrote about how sometimes people twist stories for attention, how her family was loving and supportive, how heartbreaking it was when someone lies about you for internet sympathy. Brooke's boyfriend, Kent, who I'd met maybe twice and who had some kind of online following of his own, made a video. He talked about cancel culture being out of control, about how families make mistakes but destroying people online was evil. He spoke with the authority of someone who knew all the details, even though he definitely didn't. My mother took to Facebook, where she was friends with hundreds of people from her real estate network and our extended family. She posted something about praying for family members who struggle with mental health and attention-seeking behavior. The implication was clear. I was being painted as mentally unstable, as a liar, as someone seeking attention. The extended family started choosing sides, and almost everyone chose my parents and siblings. Cousins I'd grown up with blocked me on social media. Aunts and uncles I'd known my whole life posted comments supporting Brooke and my parents. Family friends I'd called aunt and uncle out of respect, sent me private messages saying my parents were devastated, asking how I could do this to them. I watched my entire family network, built over 28 years, crumble in a matter of hours. The only people standing by me were Ivy and Aunt Lorraine, who'd already been through this herself. Brooke's friends, young women in their 20s who'd never met me but were fiercely loyal to her, started sending me nasty messages. They called me pathetic, jealous, trash. They sent long paragraphs about what an angel Brooke was and how dare I attack her like this. The messages kept coming, dozens of them, until I had to turn off notifications. But I couldn't turn off the knowledge that an entire community of people now hated me based on a version of events that wasn't true. The stress was affecting me physically. I stopped eating because my stomach was in constant knots. Sleep became impossible, my mind racing through scenarios and worries until 3 or 4 in the morning. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, incision throbbing, replaying everything over and over. Ivy noticed the decline when she came to check on me 3 days later. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, had dark circles under my eyes, was still wearing the same clothes I'd had on 2 days before. She took one look at me and said we were going to the doctor. I tried to protest, but she wasn't having it. She drove me back to the hospital where I'd had surgery, marched me up to the surgical clinic, and insisted on getting me seen. Doctor. Reed took me back, did an examination, and immediately noticed that my incision wasn't healing properly. The stress was affecting my body's ability to recover. He asked what was going on, and something about his professional kindness made me break down completely. I told him everything. The surgery alone, the family vacation, the viral post, the smear campaign, all of it. Doctor. Reed listened without interruption, then said something I needed to hear. He told me he'd been a surgeon for 20 years and had performed thousands of appendectomies. He said he'd never once had a patient completely alone during emergency surgery when family members were physically capable of being there and chose not to come. He used the word neglect. Medical professionals use that word carefully, and hearing him apply it to my situation validated something I'd been afraid to name. He strongly suggested I see a therapist to process the trauma, both from the medical emergency and from the family situation. He wrote down a name, a trauma specialist named Dr. Kemp, and told me to call that day. I did call. Dr. Kemp had an opening that week, which felt like fate. The first therapy session was difficult. Talking about my family to a stranger who was taking notes and analyzing dynamics I'd lived with my entire life. But Dr. Kemp specialized in family trauma and immediately recognized the patterns I described. She explained concepts I'd never heard before. The golden child, the scapegoat, the narcissistic family system. She drew diagrams showing how these families operate, with one child receiving all the praise and validation, while another receives blame and criticism. She asked me questions about my childhood that made connections I'd never made before. All those times I was blamed when things went wrong. All those times my achievements were minimized while my siblings were celebrated. All those times I was told I was too sensitive or too needy for having basic emotional needs. Over several sessions, Dr. Kemp helped me understand that I wasn't the problem. I'd spent 28 years believing something was wrong with me, that I needed to be better or different to earn my family's love. But the truth was simpler and more painful. My family had assigned me a role before I was old enough to understand what was happening, and nothing I did would change that role because they needed someone to be the scapegoat. It was about their dysfunction, not my worth. Meanwhile, the viral post continued to grow. It had taken on a life of its own, spreading to international forums and social media platforms. News articles were being written about family abandonment and emotional neglect, using my anonymous story as a case study. Psychology experts were weighing in on family dynamics and the long-term effects of being scapegoated. My story had become bigger than me, part of a broader conversation about toxic families and the courage it takes to walk away. But for Brooke, this was a nightmare. Her Instagram, which had been her pride and joy and source of income through brand partnerships, was flooded with critical comments. People were unfollowing her in droves. Brand deals were falling through. Brooke's response was to double down. She posted more content painting herself as the victim, crying on Instagram stories about being bullied, talking about the importance of family loyalty. But this strategy backfired spectacularly. Internet detectives, the kind of people who can find anyone from the smallest details, started piecing together who she was. Screenshots of her vacation posts were matched with timelines from my story. Her boyfriend Kent's defensive video was analyzed and criticized. Everything they posted trying to defend themselves just made them look worse. Eventually, Brooke locked down all her social media accounts, but by then the damage was done. My family's response to this public relations disaster was to blame me harder. The narrative became that I was mentally ill, that I was lying, that I was jealous of Brooke's success and trying to destroy her. My mother called mutual family friends and told them I'd always been troubled, had always struggled with reality, needed serious psychological help. My father, the lawyer, started making vague threats about legal action. Garrett sent me an email saying I was no longer his sister, that I was vindictive and unstable, that I should get help. The message was clear. If I wanted back in the family, I needed to publicly recant everything, apologize, and accept full blame. I faced a choice: stay silent and let them control the narrative, or speak my truth publicly and face the consequences. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was physically healing but emotionally exhausted from the constant attacks. That's when I received an email from a journalist named Nora Blake. She wrote for a reputable online magazine that focused on family trauma, social issues, and cultural conversations. Her email was professional and compassionate. She said she'd been following my story, recognized it as an important example of family dysfunction that many people experienced, but few talked about openly. She wanted to interview me with complete anonymity protection if I wanted it, or I could choose to go public with my real identity. She promised editorial control, fact-checking, and the opportunity to tell my side of the story in full context, rather than fragments on social media. I sat with that email for 2 days. Ivy encouraged me to do it, saying that my family was already lying about me, and at least this way, the truth would be documented properly. Aunt Lorraine agreed, sharing that Shed stayed silent for 20 years after being cut off, and it had only made her situation worse. The family had written a narrative about her that went unchallenged, and Shed lost relationships she could never get back. She didn't want me to make the same mistake. I finally responded to Nora and agreed to a phone interview, though I chose to maintain anonymity. I wasn't ready to attach my name publicly, but I was ready to tell the complete story. The interview lasted 3 hours. Nora asked thoughtful questions, never pushing but creating space for me to share at my own pace. I told her about growing up as the invisible middle child, the patterns of favoritism, the way my achievements were dismissed while my siblings were celebrated. I walked her through the night of my surgery in minute detail, the pain, the fear, the desperate calls that went unanswered. I described waking up alone, finding out my family had chosen a vacation over being there for me. I explained the aftermath, the vacation photos, my viral post, and then the smear campaign my family launched in response. Nora recorded everything, asked follow-up questions, verified details. She told me this was one of the most clear-cut cases of scapegoat abuse in a narcissistic family system that Shed encountered in her years covering these stories. The article was published 4 days later. The title read, "The Daughter They Left Behind, a Story of Family Betrayal and Viral Justice." It was long-form journalism, several thousand words with expert commentary woven throughout. Nora had interviewed psychologists who specialized in family dynamics, and they provided context for everything I'd described. There was a timeline of events with screenshots that I'd provided, showing the vacation posts from my family alongside the dates of my surgery and recovery. The article included quotes from trauma specialists about the long-term effects of being scapegoated, the courage it took to speak up, and the importance of breaking cycles of abuse. It was fair, factual, and devastating in its clarity. The article went viral immediately, bigger than my original post had been. Within 24 hours, it had millions of views. Major news sites picked it up and shared it. Morning talk shows discussed it. It became a cultural conversation about family obligation, emotional abuse, and what we owe to blood relatives who treat us poorly. My workplace was incredibly supportive. My boss called me into her office not to reprimand me but to offer additional time off if I needed it and to let me know the entire team stood behind me. Coworkers sent messages of support. Even people I barely knew at work made a point to tell me they'd read the article and were sorry I'd gone through that. The response from strangers was overwhelming. I received thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of being scapegoated, being neglected, being the family member who never quite fit. People told me I'd given them courage to set boundaries with their own toxic families. Parents reached out saying the article had made them examine their own behavior and commit to treating all their children equally. Therapists contacted me to say they were sharing the article with clients who struggled to name their family experiences as abuse. Online support groups formed around the topic, people finding community with others who understood. I realized my story had touched something universal, a pain that many people carried in silence. Harper joined some of these online support groups anonymously, needing connection with people who understood. She found community there, people who got it without her having to explain. They shared coping strategies, celebrated small victories like setting boundaries or going no contact, and mourned together the families they wished they'd had. For the first time, Harper didn't feel alone in her experience. She wasn't the only one whose family had failed them. She wasn't crazy or too sensitive or broken. She was a survivor of something real and documented and understood by professionals. But with this public vindication came consequences. My family's rage reached new heights. My father left a voicemail, his lawyer voice completely gone, replaced by pure anger. He said I'd destroyed the family, that I'd better be happy with myself, that I should never contact any of them again. My mother sent a long text message that was somehow worse than the yelling. She wrote about all the sacrifices Shed made raising me, everything Shed given me, and said this was how I repaid her. She called me ungrateful and selfish, accused me of being vindictive. She ended with telling me to lose her number. Garrett's email was clinical and cold. He wrote that I was no longer his sister, that I was mentally unstable and vindictive, that I needed professional help. The irony of him telling me to get help when I was actively in therapy wasn't lost on me. Brooke's response was the most public. She posted a cryptic Instagram story, her first post since locking down her accounts. It was a quote in pretty script over a sunset background that said, "Sometimes trash takes itself out." She didn't name me, didn't have to. Everyone knew what she meant. Then she blocked me on every platform, digital and otherwise. It expected this response. Dr. Kemp had warned me it would happen, but it still hurt. Some part of me had held on to hope that maybe this would be the thing that finally made them see me, made them take responsibility, made them apologize. But Ivy's words came back to me. They'd shown me exactly who they were. I needed to believe them. I made a decision sitting in Dr. Kemp's office during my session that week. I was done fighting for scraps of their love. I was done hoping they'd change. I was done accepting blame for their dysfunction. I began the process of going no contact, which Dr. Kemp explained would be essential for my healing. It meant blocking their numbers, blocking them on all social media, asking mutual connections not to share information about me. It meant accepting that I was walking away from my entire family of origin. It felt like grief and relief tangled together, mourning people who were still alive but who I could no longer have in my life. 3 weeks had passed since my surgery, and I was finally feeling physically normal again. The incision had healed properly once I'd reduced my stress levels. I could move without pain, could climb my apartment stairs without getting winded, could sleep through the night. My body was recovering even as my emotional healing continued. That's when I received a Facebook message request from someone named Mallory. The last name was familiar, and I realized this was my cousin, Aunt Lorraine's daughter. Mallory and I had been close as kids but had lost touch around the time her mother was cut off from the family. I accepted the message request, curious. Mallory's message was direct. She said she'd seen the article and immediately knew it was about our family. She said she was sorry I'd gone through this, that she understood more than I knew. She asked if we could talk on the phone. When we connected later that day, Mallory told me her story. She'd been cut off from the family 7 years ago when she was 23. The reason? She'd questioned my father's parenting at a family dinner, specifically his obvious favoritism toward Garrett. She'd done it respectfully, just asked why my dad always praised Garrett but rarely had kind words for me. My father had exploded, called her disrespectful, and declared she was no longer welcome at family events until she apologized. Mallory, who had a strong sense of justice, refused to apologize for telling the truth. She was shut out completely. Mallory and I talked for over 2 hours, comparing notes, discovering patterns. Our family had a history of cutting off anyone who challenged their narrative or pointed out their dysfunction. It wasn't just me, wasn't just Mallory and Aunt Lorraine. There were other relatives who'd been slowly frozen out over the years for various perceived slights. We were all people who'd questioned, who'd pointed out favoritism or unfairness, who'd refused to play along with the family's preferred story. The pattern was clear. Dissent was not tolerated. Challenging the hierarchy was punished with exile. Mallory and I reconnected deeply over those conversations, bonding over shared experiences and shared exclusion. A few days later, I received an Instagram message from another name I recognized but hadn't heard from in years. Tessa had been one of my best friends in high school. We'd been inseparable sophomore and junior year, then suddenly she'd stopped talking to me senior year. Id tried reaching out a few times but never got responses, so Id assumed Shed just moved on to other friends. Her message now explained what had really happened. She wrote that Shed seen the article and wanted me to know that Shed never wanted to stop being my friend. She said my mother had called her mother during our sophomore year and told her I was going through some mental health issues and needed space from friendships. Her mom had told her to respect my boundaries and not contact me. Tessa had waited for me to reach out when I was ready, but I never did because I had no idea any of this had happened. I felt sick reading this. I asked Tessa if she had any proof, not because I didn't believe her but because I needed to see it to fully comprehend it. She sent screenshots from an old email account. There was correspondence between her mother and mine. My mother had written that I was struggling with depression and anxiety, that my therapist had recommended reducing social stimulation, that it would be best if Tessa gave me space for a while. None of this was true. I hadn't been seeing a therapist sophomore year. I hadn't been depressed. I had been, as far as I knew, a normal teenager with normal friendships. But my mother had systematically contacted my friends and pushed them away from me. Tessa told me Shed always felt guilty about abandoning me, had wondered over the years how I was doing, had been relieved to see I seemed okay on social media, even though we weren't connected anymore. She apologized over and over for not reaching out anyway, for believing my mother instead of checking with me directly. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She was 16 when this happened. How was she supposed to know my mother was lying? We made plans to get coffee once I was feeling better, both of us eager to rebuild a friendship that had been stolen from us. This revelation sent me digging deeper. I reached out to 3 other friends, who'd mysteriously drifted away during high school and early college. 2 responded, and both had similar stories. My mother or father had contacted their parents with concerns about my mental health, suggested the friendships were too intense or unhealthy for me, asked them to create distance. My parents had deliberately isolated me, cutting me off from support systems outside the family, making me more dependent on them while simultaneously treating me as less important than my siblings. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I brought all of this to Dr. Kemp. I showed her the screenshots, told her about the conversations with former friends, explained the pattern. Dr. Kemp's face remained professionally neutral, but I could see anger flash in her eyes. She explained that isolation was a classic abuse tactic. Abusive family systems often work to cut off the scapegoats outside relationships, making them more dependent and easier to control. By destroying my friendships while I was young, my parents ensured I'd have nowhere to turn, no one to validate my experiences, no outside perspective to help me see that the treatment wasn't normal. It was calculated and deliberate, which somehow made it hurt worse than if it had been unintentional neglect. I started reaching out to these old friends, rebuilding bridges that had been burned without my knowledge or consent. Most were receptive, horrified when they learned the truth, eager to reconnect. My support system began to grow. I had Ivy, who'd been there from the beginning. I had Aunt Lorraine, who understood the family dynamics intimately. I had Mallory, who'd walked a similar path. I had Tessa and others, friendships being resurrected after years. I created what Dr. Kemp called a chosen family, people who chose to be in my life and whom I chose in return, based on mutual care and respect, rather than obligation and blood. We celebrated this small victory with a dinner party at my apartment. It was simple. Just pasta and salad and cheap wine. But the laughter and warmth filled my space in a way it never had before. These people genuinely cared about me. They asked how I was doing and actually listened to the answer. They remembered things I told them and followed up later. They showed up when they said they would. This is what family should feel like, I realized. Not the constant anxiety of wondering if I'd done something wrong. Not the careful monitoring of my words to avoid conflict. Not the feeling of being tolerated rather than celebrated. Just genuine, reciprocal love and support. But even as I was building this new chosen family, my biological family wasn't done making my life difficult. Mallory called me one evening with a warning. Shed overheard her mother talking to another aunt on the phone. Apparently, my parents were consulting with a lawyer about possible legal action against me. They wanted to sue me for defamation, for damage to their reputations, for emotional distress. They were claiming the article and my public statements had harmed my father's law practice and my mother's real estate business. Mallory wanted me to be prepared because she knew how ruthless they could be. I panicked. I didn't have money for a lawyer. I was still catching up on medical bills from the surgery. The thought of a legal battle with my family, who had far more resources than I did, was terrifying. Ivy helped me find legal aid through a domestic abuse nonprofit. They connected me with a lawyer named Jenna Torres, who took cases pro bono when they involved family abuse situations. Jenna was 41, fierce, with a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. She reviewed everything I had: the article, the medical records, the timeline, the screenshots of my family's vacation posts, and their subsequent smear campaign. After an hour of review, Jenna looked up and told me I had nothing to worry about. Everything Id said was true and documented. Id never used their real names. Truth was an absolute defense against defamation. They had no case. 1 month after my surgery, I received a thick envelope via certified mail that required my signature. Inside was a legal demand letter from an attorney named Stuart Kane, representing my parents, Garrett and Brooke. The letter was intimidating, full of legal language and threats. It demanded a public retraction and apology for all statements Id made about the family. It demanded payment of $50,000 for emotional distress and damage to reputation. It demanded I sign a cease and desist agreement to never discuss the family publicly again. If I didn't comply within 10 business days, they would file a lawsuit for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and any other claims their attorney could think of. I called Jenna immediately, hands shaking as I read the letter to her over the phone. She told me to send her a photo of every page, which I did. Then she told me to breathe, that demand letters like this were often intimidation tactics designed to scare people into compliance. She spent the next several days crafting a response. Her letter was beautiful in its directness. She pointed out that Id never used their names, that everything Id stated was factually accurate and documented with medical records and their own social media posts. That truth was a complete defense against defamation. She noted that they'd actually created more public attention through their response than my anonymous post had initially generated. She threatened a countersuit for harassment and abuse of process if they proceeded with baseless litigation. She sent the letter, and we waited. Their lawyer backed down on the lawsuit threat, probably after actually reviewing the case and realizing they'd lose. But he requested a meeting to resolve this matter amicably. Jenna advised me that I didn't have to attend, that we could handle everything through lawyers, but part of me wanted to face them one last time. I wanted to say to their faces what I'd never been able to say, wanted to stand my ground one final time. Jenna agreed to attend with me, making it clear I was protected and could leave at any time. I brought Ivy along for moral support. We met at the lawyer's office downtown, neutral territory where Id feels safer than in a family home full of memories and power dynamics. Walking into that conference room was surreal. My entire family sat on one side of a long table with their lawyer, Stuart, at the head. He was exactly what I expected, 60 years old with silver hair and an expensive suit, the kind of old money attorney who'd probably never lost a case in his life. Jenna, Ivy, and I sat on the opposite side. The table felt like a chasm between two worlds. Stuart started with pleasantries, thanking everyone for coming, saying he hoped we could resolve this matter without court involvement. Then he laid out his client's position. They were willing to drop all legal action if I signed a non-disclosure agreement and used whatever influence I had to request the article be taken down or amended. Jenna responded calmly that I hadn't written the article, a journalist had, and I had no control over editorial decisions made by a publication. Stuart countered that I could request it, that the magazine would likely comply if I asked. Jenna asked what would be in it for me to do that. Stuart said avoiding a lengthy and expensive lawsuit should be incentive enough. That's when I spoke for the first time. I said I wouldn't ask the magazine to remove the article because everything in it was true. The room went silent for a moment. Then Brooke exploded. Her voice went shrill as she said Id ruined her life. Shed lost brand sponsorships, People recognized her in public and yelled at her. Her Instagram had gone from her pride and joy to a source of constant harassment. I looked at her calmly and said Shed ruined her own reputation with how Shed responded, that I couldn't control how the internet reacted to her behavior. Garrett jumped in, his voice cold and controlled in that way that had always intimidated me as a kid. He said I was tearing the family apart, that I was being selfish and vindictive. I felt Ivy squeeze my hand under the table, grounding me. I took a breath and said there had never really been a family, not one that included me anyway. There had been the four of them and Mom and Dad, and then there was me, just kind of existing in the background. Garrett looked taken aback, like he genuinely couldn't comprehend what I was saying. My mother started crying, her makeup running down her face. She said she couldn't believe I was saying these things, that they loved me, that family was everything. I looked at my mother and said that they'd left me alone during emergency surgery to go on vacation, and that wasn't love. My father, who'd been silent until now, said they'd apologized for that. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and sharp. I said they hadn't apologized, not once, that every conversation since had been them telling me to be quiet about it and take responsibility for their image. My father's face hardened, and he said I was being unreasonable, that I was holding a grudge over an honest mistake. I said it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice, and they'd made similar choices my entire life. I found myself standing up, leaning forward on the table, looking at each of them in turn. I told them Id almost died, that my appendix had ruptured and the infection could have killed me, that I'd been terrified and alone and calling for help. I said they'd been taking photos on a beach. I said they hadn't even called the hospital after my mother's initial call to check if I'd survived the surgery. The room was completely silent now. My mother whispered that they'd thought I was fine. I said, my voice breaking, that they hadn't thought about me at all. That was the truth we were all dancing around. They hadn't thought about me because they never really did. More silence filled the conference room, heavy and uncomfortable. Brooke asked if I just hated them now, her voice small in a way I'd rarely heard. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I said I didn't hate them, that I just didn't want to be treated like I didn't matter anymore. Garrett asked if I wanted them to grovel, if that was what this was all about. I said I wanted them to acknowledge that hurt me, that was all I'd ever wanted, just basic acknowledgement and accountability. My family members looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Then my father stood up. He said they weren't going to sit there and be attacked. My mother, Garrett, and Brooke all stood as well. My mother's parting words cut deep. She said when I was ready to apologize to them, they'd consider letting me back in the family. They walked out of the conference room, Stuart following behind them after leaving his business card and saying to call if I changed my mind. The door closed and I sat there in stunned silence. Jenna said I'd done great, that I'd stood my ground beautifully. Ivy hugged me tight. But I felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped out of my chest. That meeting had confirmed what I already knew but had been afraid to fully accept. My family would never take responsibility. They would never apologize. They would never see me as an equal person deserving of basic respect and care. This was who they were, and I had to decide if I could live with that or if I needed to walk away permanently. 2 months had passed since the surgery that changed everything. My physical scars had healed completely, just a thin pink line across my abdomen that would fade to white eventually. But the emotional healing was slower, more complicated, like untangling a knot that had been pulled tight over 28 years. I continued seeing Dr. Kemp twice a week. We worked through childhood memories, reframing them with my new understanding of family dynamics. That time I was blamed for breaking a vase, even though Brooke admitted she did it, but the punishment still fell on me because I should have been watching her. That Christmas when I got practical gifts like socks while my siblings got expensive electronics, and I was told to be grateful and not materialistic when I looked disappointed. Hundreds of small moments that had taught me I was less important, less loved, less worthy of care. Dr. Kemp introduced me to EMDR therapy, a technique for processing trauma. It felt strange at first, moving my eyes back and forth while revisiting painful memories, but something about it helped those memories lose their power over me. I joined a support group for adult children of narcissistic families. Sitting in a circle of strangers who weren't strangers at all, because they knew exactly what I'd lived through, was transformative. We shared stories, cried together, celebrated small victories like setting boundaries or having a day without thinking about our families. I learned I wasn't alone, wasn't crazy, wasn't too sensitive. I was a survivor of something real and documented and understood by psychology. The grief came in waves. Dr. Kemp had warned me about this. She explained that I needed to grieve the family I'd never had, not the family I'd lost. That distinction was important. I hadn't lost a loving, supportive family. I'd lost the hope that they might become one. I grieved the childhood I deserved but didn't get. I grieved the parents who might have protected and championed me. I grieved the siblings who could have been my closest friends and allies. I grieved all the versions of relationships that had never existed except in my imagination and longing. Thanksgiving approached, my first major holiday since going no contact with my family. Previous Thanksgivings had been exercises in endurance. I'd sit at the table while my father praised Garrett's latest promotion and my mother gushed over Brooke's social media success. Conversation would flow around me like I was a rock in a stream, present but not really part of the current. I'd volunteer to help in the kitchen just to have something to do, somewhere to belong. This year would be different. Ivy invited me to her Friendsgiving celebration. I was nervous walking into her apartment, carrying a pasta dish I'd spent all afternoon making. The space was crowded with about 12 people, a mix of Ivy's friends from different parts of her life. Aunt Lorraine was there, having driven 2 hours to be part of our chosen family celebration. Mallory came with her girlfriend. Tessa brought her partner. There were people I'd met through the support group, co-workers who'd have become friends, Ivy's roommate, and her boyfriend. We crowded around a table that was too small for all of us, sitting on mismatched chairs and eating off different plate sets. Someone asked me to share what I was grateful for. I looked around the table at all these faces, these people who'd chosen to love me, and whom I'd chosen in return. I said through tears that I was grateful for people who chose to love me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The room erupted in agreement and support, glasses raised in a toast. This is family, I realized. This feeling of safety and acceptance and genuine care. My boundaries got tested constantly by what therapists call flying monkeys, people who carry messages from the abusers because they don't understand the full situation. A distant aunt reached out saying my mother was heartbroken, and couldn't I just forgive and move past this? A family friend sent a long message about how family forgives, how blood is thicker than water, how I was throwing away something precious over a misunderstanding. A cousin I barely knew texted that this had gone on long enough and I needed to be the bigger person. Dr. Kemp had prepared me for this. Shed helped me craft a template response. I replied to each message the same way. I appreciated their concern, but this was between me and my family, and I wasn't discussing it with others. Those who persisted got blocked. I learned that boundaries weren't mean, they were necessary. They protected my peace and my healing. The article about my story continued circulating months later, finding new audiences and sparking ongoing conversations. I still received messages from strangers sharing their own experiences of family scapegoating and thanking me for helping them feel less alone. Reading these messages reminded me that my pain had purpose, that speaking up had helped people I'd never meet. I started an anonymous blog called The Scapegoat Speaks. It wasn't about my family anymore, but about the healing journey, about learning to love myself, about building a chosen family and setting boundaries. The blog grew a modest but dedicated following. People shared posts, commented with their own stories, formed a small online community. I found purpose in the pain, turning my experience into a resource for others walking similar paths. My work life improved dramatically. Without the constant background stress of family dysfunction, my creativity flourished. I threw myself into graphic design projects, experimenting with new styles, taking risks I'd been too anxious to try before. My boss noticed the change and promoted me to senior designer. I landed a major client and created a campaign that went viral in a positive way this time, winning industry recognition. Professional validation that I'd never received from my family came from colleagues and clients who actually saw my work and valued my contributions. I realized I'd been successful all along, just no one in my family had ever bothered to notice or acknowledge it. 3 months post-surgery, Aunt Lorraine sent me a letter, handwritten on thick cream paper. She wrote about how my courage had inspired her to finally start therapy and work through her own family trauma. She thanked me for speaking up, said watching me stand my ground had given her permission to stop feeling guilty for her own estrangement. Enclosed in the letter was an old photograph I'd never seen before. It showed me as a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, laughing at something off camera with pure, unguarded joy on my face. Aunt Lorraine's note said, "This is who you really are, don't forget her." I framed that photo and put it on my nightstand, a reminder of the authentic self I was working to reclaim. Christmas Eve arrived, and my phone lit up with a text from my mother. It said, "Merry Christmas, we miss you, the door is always open if you apologize." I read the message sitting on my couch with a mug of hot chocolate, Christmas lights twinkling on the small tree I'd decorated with Ivy's help. I felt nothing reading those words. No anger, no sadness, no longing, just a blank neutrality that Dr. Kemp later told me was acceptance. I deleted the message without responding. That silence was my answer. I'd reached the other side of grief, the place where they no longer had power over my emotions. New Year's Eve became a celebration of new beginnings. I hosted a party at my apartment, something I'd never done before, because I'd always gone to family events where I felt invisible. My chosen family gathered. About 15 people crowded into my small space with sparkling cider and appetizers and genuine laughter. At midnight, I raised my glass and made a toast. I said, "Here's to the family we choose, the love we deserve, and the courage to walk away from anything less." Everyone cheered and hugged, and there was joy in that room, the kind of uncomplicated happiness I'd never felt at family gatherings. I looked around at these people who saw me, really saw me, not as the invisible middle child or the scapegoat, but just as Harper, and I felt full in a way I never had before. My internal journey had never been about revenge or vindication, though the internet had framed it that way sometimes. It was about finding my voice after 28 years of being told it didn't matter. It was about learning I deserved better treatment than I'd received. It was about understanding that the abuse wasn't my fault, that nothing I could have done would have changed my role in that family system because they needed someone to be the scapegoat. It was about building a life on my own terms, surrounded by people who chose to love me. I realized that my family skipping my emergency surgery had been terrible and traumatic, but it had also been a catalyst. It woke me up to patterns I'd been conditioned to accept. I wouldn't choose to go through it again, but I was grateful for the clarity it had brought. Some people say that blood is thicker than water, using it to argue that family bonds are the strongest. But I learned the full quote is actually the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, meaning the bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. I learned that love without respect, presence, or effort isn't really love at all. It's just a word people use to control you, to keep you accepting less than you deserve. I learned that my family hadn't forgotten me during my emergency surgery. They'd been forgetting me my whole life. It just finally noticed. Going viral didn't ruin my family like they claimed. It revealed them. And in doing so, it freed me. I'm not the daughter they wanted, the one who would stay quiet and accept her place and never challenge the hierarchy. But I'm exactly the person I was meant to be, and that's enough. I'm enough, just as I am, without their approval, or validation, or love. That realization didn't come all at once, but in small moments over months of therapy and healing. The night after my party, I was alone in my apartment, cleaning up glasses and plates, feeling peaceful in a way I'd never experienced before. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She stood straighter. Her eyes were clearer. She looked free. I ran my finger over the scar from my appendix surgery. This physical reminder of the night everything changed. I'd hated that scar at first, seeing it as a mark of trauma and abandonment. But now I saw it differently. The old Harper, the one who'd accepted crumbs of affection and believed she didn't deserve more, had died on that operating table. A new Harper had emerged from the surgery, one who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less than genuine love and respect. My phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. It just said, "Love you, sis." I smiled and texted back, "Love you too." She wasn't my sister by blood, but she was my sister in every way that mattered. I turned off the lights and went to bed, falling asleep easily. No nightmares or anxiety, just the deep peace that comes from finally choosing yourself. I didn't lose my family when the truth went viral. I found myself. And in the end, that was worth everything. My story isn't unique. Thousands of people are living versions of it right now, feeling invisible in their own families, wondering if they're asking for too much when they want basic love and respect. If you're one of those people, I want you to know something important. You're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're not the problem. You deserve better. You deserve to be seen and valued and celebrated. And if your family can't or won't give you that, you have permission to build a new family from people who will. It's not giving up. It's not being selfish. It's survival. It's choosing life and health and peace over dysfunction and pain. You deserve that choice. We all do. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, or had to set boundaries with toxic relatives? Drop a comment below and share your experience, because your story matters and you're not alone in this. If this resonated with you, hit that like button so this reaches others who need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories about healing, boundaries, and chosen family. Share this video with someone who needs to know they deserve better. Thank you so much for listening to my story and being part of this community. I'm sending you all strength and peace on your own healing journeys. Remember, the family you choose can be stronger than the one you were born into. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.